Out front now, Evelyn Farkas, who was the Deputy Assistant Defense Secretary for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia, along with retired U.S. Army Brigadier General Peter Zwack, who was the former senior U.S. defense official and attaché to Russia. So, General, let me start with you. We have not heard words like this from the IAEA, and yet here we are 100 days in the war. They're saying there's a clear and present risk to that Zaporizhzhia power plant. I should note the nuclear waste there is stored in non-reinforced containers. It is stored above ground. This is the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. It's been 100 days of war, and now we have an imminent crisis there. General, how concerned are you about this?
In early March, it was a near miss. Rounds got fired into the overall, if you will, compound of Zaporizhzhia. It's the Zaporizhzhia nuclear reactor complex, and it came close to actually hitting something of high value, highly dangerous. So, but the IAEA is very nervous now that there hasn't been that there's no regulation. The Ukrainians are saying they need spare parts to operate, if you will, these reactors. It is in a war zone, so all of that together is potentially quite dangerous. If it goes in some horrific way, you've just hit, it's just completely contaminated a breadbasket, an industrial air, and the vapors would flow. So it's big trouble. It's big worry.
Yeah, I mean, obviously deeply, deeply concerning when we're at this point. And, I know someone who has a family member who works at that plant. They're not even able to speak to them, right? Because Ukrainians are still working there every day, even though Russians control it. I mean, it's sort of unbelievable, the black hole that the situation is in. Evelyn, it comes as Russia has dozens of ships and subs in the Black Sea, launching guided missiles from the Black Sea across Ukraine. I mentioned what Admiral Stavridis, former commanding general of NATO, said, that this is going to be the next front in the war. Obviously, this would greatly expand the war. What do you think?
Full disclosure, I worked for him when he was the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. I agree that we are likely to see more warfare in the Black Sea unless the international community gets more heavily involved, Erin. And that you've just given us two instances where we need the United Nations, we need the international community to come in with a coalition of the willing to force the Russians to allow nuclear inspectors into Ukraine and to unblock the seaports in Ukraine, because we need to get the grain out for the world community. As you've covered elsewhere, there is a shortage now of grain because of the war that Russia is waging on Ukraine. Both of these things require international efforts to make sure that that the war doesn't continue to cause the impact that it has had globally. And frankly, we need to bring it to a close as soon as possible.
So, General Zwack, Ukraine and Russia, both state media announced yet another Russian general was killed in the war, right? So this is now being admitted to from both sides. Obviously, another big blow to Russia. We need to contextualize it now, though, because Ukraine has suffered some setbacks in the Donbass. President Zelensky says that Russia now controls up to 20% of the sovereign, independent country of Ukraine. So, General, what does another Russian general being killed right now tell you?
Well, it tells me that they've pushed them up toward the front, as we discussed a while ago, because while the Russians have a lot of manpower, not of the best quality anymore, with a lot of artillery, they need people to push and motivate the troops and get things going, because while the Russians are making gains in the Donbass, in Luhansk, they're incremental. And it is an ugly fight. And this is going on all over the country. So they're being pushed forward. Their communications security is lousy. They're getting, whether they're targeted by electronics or by snipers, yes, it is bad. To lose 10, 11, 12 generals is extraordinary.
And yet, Evelyn, when we talked about this a month ago, it was a very different context. The context was Russia's troops are ill prepared. Their morale is low. Their generals are being killed left and right. Ukraine is winning. And yet here we are, where somehow amidst all this, Russia has, according to President Zelensky, doubled its control of Ukrainian territory over that time frame. 10% they took in 2014 when in the occupied Donbass as well as Crimea. And now Zelensky says it's 20%. So Who is winning right now, Evelyn?
Well, Erin, right now, I would say that strategically, Vladimir Putin is losing, and that I would say Ukraine has an edge operationally, but tactically, neither side is winning. And the reason why you see this difference now is because the warfare has changed, the terrain has changed. The Russians are afraid to send their troops in, as General Zwack just said. They're using artillery to essentially shred these cities and towns to pieces. And only then will the Russian troops go in because they're so afraid of the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are at the moment at a tactical disadvantage and operationally as well because they lack the artillery, the longer range artillery and missiles to shoot back at the Russians. But that's about to change. As we know, the US government has authorized providing some multiple rocket launcher missiles to the Ukrainians, and they're training them with this equipment. And there's more equipment coming from other allies that's similar, longer range. And this will change the equation. It's just a question of time. And I think that's why the Russians are getting nervous, because time is not on their side.
All right. Thank you both very much for your perspective.